Okay, so now we are ready to talk about the specialized connective tissues, those connective tissues that probably at first glance may not seem as if they are likely to be connective tissues. So let's just jump right in and start talking about them. There we are. Okay, so the first kind of specialized connective tissue is a connective tissue called cartilage. So cartilage is built of a ground substance that has a lot of a protein polysaccharide material. So it's got protein in it and this polysaccharide, so a multiple sugar carbohydrate. And together they create a really firm, solid gel. So the ground substance is this very firm kind of gel-like material. And the primary tissue fiber that's found in cartilage is a collagenous fiber. The specialized cell that we see associated with this is a kind of a cell called a chondrocyte. So chondro, if you remember that from, I think it was the first chapter, where the chondro means cartilage. And so these are the cells that we find in cartilage. And the chondrocytes themselves are found in structures called lacunae. For me, I always think the word lagoon. So it's like a small chamber, a fluid-filled chamber that the cell is found in. So here would be our cell, specialized cell, and it's found inside this small chamber. And that chamber, this space, is the lacuna. Or if it's plural, we just add an E to it, lacunae. The whole cartilage is surrounded by a kind of connective tissue called perichondrium. And the tissue cartilage is avascular. So what is that term, avascular? Think about that for a minute, and you can even pause the show. Okay, so A would be without vascular. That means without blood vessels. So because there's relatively little blood supply, and sometimes no blood supply at all, cartilage tissues can be very slow to repair because they don't get sufficient nutrients or oxygen to be able to repair. Some cartilages, if they're damaged, can't repair at all. There are no nerves found, no nervous tissue found in cartilages. And they can be classified into three types of cartilage. There's hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. So the next three slides, we're going to look at each of these cartilage types. So hyaline cartilage here is the most common cartilage that we find in the body. And it's composed of an extracellular matrix with lots and lots of very closely packed collagenous fibers. So this purple kind of smooth-looking material, that would be the extracellular matrix. And it's a very, very firm, because of these closely packed collagenous fibers, it's a very, very firm extracellular matrix. And here is a lacuna, so I'm outlining that. It looks like a white space, so it would just be a clear, fluid-filled space. And inside the lacuna is the chondrocyte. And so we find this kind of cartilage in the ribs. It's what connects the ribs back to the sternum. So when you look at the skeleton and you see where the ribs are not bone, that's all hyaline cartilage. It's also found at the tip of the nose, so it has some flexibility. And in the rings around the trachea and other respiratory passages, they're held open by this very firm cartilage material. And then the third place, or another place that we find it, is in the growth plate of the long bones. Excuse me, I've got my cat, and he is right here nearby, and he's being real pesky. So if you hear noises in the background, that's him scratching and meowing. In hyaline cartilage, the collagenous fibers are transparent, and so the ground substance has this glassy, smooth appearance. And then some people look at this and they see little eyeballs with the works for you, that glassy, smooth appearance, that's hyaline cartilage. Second kind of cartilage is called elastic cartilage, and in it the extracellular matrix is filled with many elastic fibers, and so that makes this kind of cartilage very, very flexible. And you can see all the elastic fibers here. That's all that fibrous looking material that's in the extracellular matrix around the lacunae. We find elastic cartilage in the external ear. So we talk about that as the auricle, the part of the ear flap that sticks away from the head. And it's also found in parts of the larynx, the voice box. So in the tissue samples, you'll see that the elastic fibers in the cartilage stain really dark, and they almost resemble kind of branching roots. And then, of course, the lacunae are going to be really obvious. The third type of cartilage is referred to as fibrocartilage. Now, this is the cartilage that's going to be the most difficult to distinguish from other connective tissues. I think that this looks a lot like the dense, regular connective tissue because it's a really tough tissue, very similar in that respect to the dense, regular connective tissues. And it's primarily, the ground substance is primarily collagenous fibers with very little of the ground substance material. I'm sorry, the extracellular matrix is primarily collagenous fibers with relatively little ground substance. And the chondrocytes, though, can be seen scattered about in their lacunae. So those collagenous fibers are arranged just like we saw in dense regular connective tissue, in kind of along each other, in parallel to each other. But what you can see in the fibrocartilage is the lacuna around each of the chondrocytes there. We find fibrocartilage in the intervertebral discs. It's there, the toughness of it helps to absorb shock and prevents the bone-to-bone contact that can be so painful as people have a slipped disc. And it's also found at the pubic symphysis, which is a joint in between the two pubic bones down at the front of the pelvis. It's a strong and flexible connection there that will allow the pubic bones to stretch apart from each other as the baby's head passes through the vaginal canal and out of out through the pelvic bones. So fibrocartilage, again, this is the one that you're going to have to really look at to make sure that you can distinguish from other connective tissues. All right, so cartilage are one type of connective tissue. Bone is a second type of the specialized connective tissues. The bones are probably the most rigid of the specialized connective tissues. So very, very dense, because the extracellular matrix has very little ground substance at all. It's mostly composed of collagenous fibers, and then it has a large amount of mineral salts. Calcium phosphate is one of the salts. Calcium carbonate is the other. Those are the primary salts. There are others too. And that gives the bone real rigidity. Bony tissue is very well vascularized. There's lots and lots of blood vessels that deliver nutrients and materials to the bone. So the blood vessels run in a central canal associated with the bone. Osteoblasts are one of the cell types that we find in bone tissue. The osteoblasts begin forming the bone material, and eventually they isolate themselves in a little lacuna. So the lacuna is this dark area here filled with its specialized cell. And after they isolate themselves in the lacuna and fully wall themselves in with the mineral salts that they produce, they mature into a cell called an osteocyte. Osteoblasts I think of blast as meaning build. I don't think that's the direct interpretation, but that's how I interpret it. So osteoblasts begin to build the bony material. The osteocytes, on the other hand, they're the mature cell, and their responsibility is to maintain it. So bone, especially the compact bone, the strongest of the bone tissues, is arranged into a functional unit called an osteon. It's almost like I think of it as like a series of tree trunks. If you look here, and when you look at the sample, you'll see that there are multiple osteons. That's a single osteon. Here we are looking up a little bit closer at the osteon. And the osteon is composed of an opening in the center of this unit. That's where the blood vessels and the lymph vessels and a neuron run. So we have the connection, or not connecting, but say connections back to the nutrient supply and to the nervous impulses from the brain are all found here in the central canal. And surrounding the central canal, I'm going to look over here to an osteon off to the side, but you can see layers of bony material. And those layers, almost like rings in a tree, are referred to as lamellae. That means sheet, lamella. So if something is laminated, it's in multiple sheets. So the lamellae are concentric. Concentric means one within the other, almost creating a bullseye effect. So concentric rings or layers of that bony matrix. And then right here between the lamellae, that's where we find the osteocytes living within their lacunae. So that's what the arrows are pointing to. Those three green arrows are pointing out the lacunae with the osteocyte inside of the lacunae. And then interconnecting the lacunae, we see little canals called canaliculi that connect all the way back to that central canal. And these canaliculi allow the lacunae to interconnect, and the osteocytes reach through these little canals and connect with each other in order to diffuse nutrients into the cells and into all of these outer rings so that the osteocytes can continue to rebuild and repair the bony matrix. And then they diffuse waste materials through each other back toward the central canal so that we can get rid of the wastes as well. So bone is, I never thought about bone until I began teaching this class. I never really thought about it as a living tissue, but it is very much a living tissue. And the bone cells there repair and replace that bony tissue all the time because we're constantly making these little micro fractures in the bone tissue. And then the third type of specialized connective tissue is the blood. In the blood, we see that there are a thin, fluidy ground substance. We talk about that as blood plasma. And in it, there are dissolved proteins, not protein fibers. So we see dissolved proteins in here, in the blood plasma, in the extracellular matrix. And they only turn into fibers when the blood is ready to clot. And all those proteins link together to make fibrous chains. And we think of that as the developing blood clot. So the ground substance is referred to as plasma, has dissolved proteins, and then just a really thin, loose fluid. And the cells that we find in blood plasma include the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. These are them. They have kind of a donut shape if you look at them in side view cross-section. So here's that thinner area in the center of each of the red blood cells. Their job is to transport gases, and they're only found inside the blood vessels. Also associated with the cells with the blood are white blood cells. These are large macrophages that circulate in the blood and remove debris and help to fight infections by engulfing bacteria. And they also have the capacity to move between blood vessels and tissues. So rather than being restricted only to the blood vessels, they can get out into the tissues to help clean up things. And then also associated with blood, we see not a true cell, but a cell fragment. These guys are the platelets. So these are small fragments, and they play a role in clotting. They carry some of the clotting factors in the blood. So the function of blood then is to transport nutrients around the cell, and then to help defend the body against infections. All right, so there you have the three types of specialized connective tissues: blood, bone, and cartilage. And recall that within cartilage, there are three kinds of cartilage: the glassy, smooth hyaline cartilage, the very fibrous and elastic cartilage, and then the very fibrous but not elastic necessarily fibrocartilages. Okay, so we'll end it there.